I want to read a few texts from the Old Testament and then from James. The first is Exodus 20. You should see it on the screen. This is what it says. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Proverbs 14 and Proverbs 27 says this. A sound heart is life to the body, but envy is rottenness to the bones. Anger is cruel and fury overwhelming. He's talking about road rage. And then he says, but who is able to stand up before envy? James chapter 3. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but it's earthly, it's unspiritual, and it's demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. Two cows, they're hanging out on the side of a hill, chatting, and there's a road that goes by, and here comes a milk truck. And written on the side of the milk truck, it says, milk, pasteurized, homogenized, standardized, vitamin D added. So one of the cow, he sighs and he says to his friend, makes you feel kind of inadequate, doesn't it? That's a joke. You're supposed to laugh. Actually, cows don't feel envy. They don't have any reason to. They're just created by God to do what they do, and they do it. Us, not as much. We live with envy. Tolstoy has written a really insightful short story. It's called How Much Land Does a Man Need? Great question. So in the story, it's about this peasant who gets a piece of land and he makes it prosper, and he wants more land because now he's found out that there's people that has more than he does. So he needs to get more and more and more. And so that's what he gives his life to. And in the end, while finally attaining the piece of property that he thinks will put him on the top of the pile, he collapses and he dies. And Tolstoy's conclusion is that a man comes with a shovel, and the plot that he ends with is 6 feet long. It's the same size as everybody else's. So he spent his whole life chasing something and ends up with nothing. Yesterday, I had the privilege of being with a family at the cemetery saying goodbye to ones they loved. The cemetery we were in, all the stones are flat. So somebody that was standing there asked the guy from the cemetery, why aren't there any gravestones? His response was, what difference does it make? Like, everybody here doesn't care. It doesn't matter. He's right. Envy. The scripture talks a lot about it. It's a really powerful thing. We've been talking about the good life. If we were to ask God, what would a good life look like? I think the words that he would speak to us are the ones we find in Exodus chapter 20. They're words given to Moses, written on stone. If you want to know how to love God and love people and make sense out of this story, this is what it would look like. We're looking at the last one today. One of the soul sicknesses that destroys the good life is envy. It's a disease that is rampant all around us, but if you ask everybody, nobody seems to have it. I've been a pastor for like 30 years now. I started when I was 3. And in those years, I've had the privilege of walking with people through some really difficult places in their journey. I've had people confess to me, and I say that's a privilege. when any of us confess, that's a privilege. That's how we get free. But I've gotten to pray with people about adultery, about lying, about idolatry. Strange that in those 30 years, I've never had somebody come to me and say, you know what, Pastor, I am just struggling with envy. So what's the conclusion? Maybe nobody has this. Or maybe we all do, and we're so used to it, we don't see it anymore. That's the one I'm going with. So, in truth, envy is really hard to decipher. Like murder, it's not real complicated. There's a dead body, something happened here, let's talk about it. Lying, they have lie detector tests. Is there an envy detector? Like, how do you find this in your soul? It's not something that you do, it's something that you are. It's about what you desire. And this word that God speaks to his people, it's not forbidding an action, it's forbidding an attitude. It doesn't fit in the list. Honor your parents. Don't commit adultery. Don't lie about your neighbor. The 10th one seems like, is this really that big of a deal? Like, yeah, it is. In fact, if you read the story in the Old Testament, the consequences of envy are scattered across all the pages. Read the story of the second generation, Cain and Abel. They both give a sacrifice to God. And God says, I receive Abel's, but I don't receive Cain's. That's not what I asked for. So what does Cain do? Instead of saying, okay, I'll do what you ask, he kills his brother. Jacob and Esau. Angel was teaching the little ones this morning, first hour, and the story was about Jacob and Esau. So we were talking about it last night. Who's the good guy? There isn't one. It's just envy. It destroyed their whole family. Miriam and Moses, Joseph and his brothers, Jesus and his disciples. Envy is everywhere. And it kills. From like 1998 to 2002, 2003, we were living in West Africa, in Abidjan. We were planting a church. And one of the things that we were doing was a weekend for couples. It was called Marriage Encounter. 48 hours, invite these couples to a really nice hotel. And God was just doing unbelievable things, using this to really help us in planting this church. During those like 5 or 6 years, we just saw God do some amazing things. I mean, literally, this cost thousands of dollars, and we started out with nothing. But God provided. We had over 200 couples come through this. The last one we did in Abidjan before the war ended it, we were doing it at this big intercontinental hotel, had the weekend all set up. I get a call from the hotel director a couple weeks before the event, and he says, I'm sorry, but Saturday night, the room that you have is not going to be available. I said, how is that possible? We already rented it. He said, well, the president's daughter is getting married, and they need the room. Well, that's like the most important night in this weekend. They said, well, we'll get you a place in town. We'll take you by. No, that won't work. So we said, we can't do that. They said, Pastor, you don't understand. In Côte d'Ivoire, when the president says that something's going to happen, that's what happened. So I went back with the team. One of the ladies says, well, let's just pray. So we prayed. They had the president. We had the king. And the king won in that one. And he calls me back and he says, Pastor, I don't know what happened, but so in those 6 years, we just saw God do these. I mean, the challenges were every week there was a new challenge. But as we look back at the story, the most challenging thing was not money, it was not people, it was not hotels, it was jealousy. Like the team of leaders. It just seemed like every week somebody was jealous of somebody. One night we're talking about it, and one of the women on our leadership team said, Pastor, you don't understand. Like, that's just part of life. Envy is everywhere. We have a story we tell here. This is how the story goes. Happened in Zambia. when God was creating the world, and the first man he created, put him in a garden. A few days later, he came to this man and he said to him, tomorrow I'm going to create your neighbor. But here's the deal. You can ask me for anything you want, but whatever you ask for, I'm going to bless your neighbor with double the blessing. The guy says, let me think about that. So God comes back the next day and he finds this man and he says to him, what do you want me to bless you with? He says, I'd like you to poke out my right eye. That's not good. We laugh, but that's the heart of all of us. So envy is this thing that's like a cancer that gets inside of us. The proverb said it's like something that gets down into your bones. So God says to his people, if you want to love me and you want to love others, here's what it would look like. He says, don't covet your neighbor's wife. Do not set your desire on your neighbor's house or land or his maidservant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to him. Remember that these words were not only words to help them know how to walk. The people that received these words, they didn't know God. They'd been slaves for 400 years. They'd heard like these stories about God, but they didn't know him. So he's revealing himself through these words. What is this saying to us about God? What does this 10th word reveal about who he is? Sociologists have coined a term that is called limited good. Here's the idea. There's only so much good to go around, and there's not enough for everybody. So in any given society, there's only so much good, so much blessing, so much honor to go around. So naturally, one person's success must come at the cost of someone else's good. So a lot of the wars that we're experiencing, it's because there's not enough. There's not enough water, there's not enough food, there's not enough. So if somebody gets some, then somebody else doesn't. But guess what? God's not like that. Jesus taught exactly the opposite. He says that in my kingdom, there is no limit of grace. There is no limit on the goodness of God. He gives lavishly to all who come. The goal with God is not to make sure you get your share. It's just to receive. Last week, Ellen and I were praying about something, and in my spirit, I was hesitating. I'm like, why am I hesitating? The reason I was hesitating was because sometimes I just get overwhelmed by God's goodness. I just can't believe how gracious he is. And here I am asking again. Like, seriously? Joel, come on. I just helped you last week. How many times? You know, God never has that thought. Ever. You need more grace? Oh, stink. This week there's a little bit of a shortage going on. Can you come back next week? No. So why is he asking us not to envy? Because he never does. Everything that he has and needs already is. And everything that we need is in him. So what does it look like to have envy in your spirit, in your heart? Well, envy is the pain, I chose the word pain, that you feel when someone else has what you want or you think should be yours. And it hurts. It's like this incurable fear that others probably have it better than you. And for crying out loud, that should not be. That's what envy looks like. It's really powerful. I mean, when it gets inside you, it can really destroy you. This is what it says in Proverbs. It says, a sound heart is life to the body, but envy is rottenness to the bones. It's like a picture of cancer. When cancer gets into your bones, it's the end. And he's saying when you allow envy into your soul, it'll destroy you. He goes on in chapter 27 to say, anger is cruel and fury is overwhelming. But who is able to stand in front of envy? The hard thing is that envy is invisible to the naked eye. It's this unhealthy desire that we get to possess what God did not intend for us. Came across this Thomas DeLong, a professor at Harvard Business School, doing research, and he came across this disturbing trend in his students and colleagues that he calls a comparison obsession. An obsession with comparison. He said this has always been part of the human story, but now with social media, it's just gone off the charts. So that any day of the week you can get on Facebook and realize how bad your life really is. Seriously. Look at their family. But this is his observation. A former student of mine who graduated 10 years ago has a terrific job at a Fortune 500 company, still suffers from this comparison obsession. It seemed like she had a great job until she received her alumni newsletter and learned that a fellow alumnus who was in the MBA program with her had just been named vice president at a Fortune 100 company. From that moment on, she could barely hold a conversation without bemoaning her lack of vice president and Fortune 100 status. On more than one occasion, she told others that she felt like a complete failure. Here's his conclusion. More so than ever before, business executives, Wall Street analysts, lawyers, doctors, other professionals are obsessed with comparing their achievements to those of others. He said it's telling that in his 3-year study, he interviewed 500 people that he calls high need to achieve professionals. And this is what he found. More than 400 of them questioned their own success and brought up the name of at least one other person that they felt was more successful than they were. Many of these individuals are considered among the best and the brightest in the world, yet they live in the prison of comparison. Isn't that sad? So the people that we're looking up at, they're looking up at somebody else. We're thinking they found it. Oh, for crying out loud, look where they are. It's not because of reality, it's because somebody else has more. It's a really powerful thing. One sociologist observed, and I think there's some truth in this, that often envy is between brothers and brothers and sisters and sisters. Sometimes it crosses over lines, but for the most part, it's with the people that are searching for the same thing you are. So the people that are in your sphere of influence, when somebody next to you is promoted, you suddenly discover the true nature of your relationship. It talks about how probably women and men envy different things. I can't say that for a fact. I've never been a woman. But I was walking through the grocery line the other day, and you look at this barrage of magazines that seem to talk about very little of importance. But I'm looking at one, and I thought, if I was a woman, I would look at that, and I would say to myself, self, that lady, husband looks a lot better than mine. Her body looks significantly better than mine. Her children seem smarter. Her house is a lot nicer. She has better recipes. The list goes on. Men don't usually fret about those same things. I've never been jealous of somebody who won a Miss America pageant. That's just not something that's a goal of mine. But you do look around in the sphere where you live, and men ask different questions. They ask, like, who's better known? Who makes more money? Who's in better shape? Who has more hair? Okay, this thank you. This is not in my notes, but I'll just add this. When we first moved here, I worked for 10 months at Grace Church. Some of you came from Grace Church. Tuesday morning, all the pastors gathered to pray. So the first day I get there, and there's like 20 of them around this table to pray together. And I'm looking around, and I said to myself, Self, everybody that's at this table that's your age doesn't have any hair. What do they do to people here? Like, what happened? That has nothing to do with anything. And I said in the first service, if any of you say to Jonathan that I said this, I will deny it, and there's nothing written here. The point is simply that we always find something, and it's the people that are closest to us, and we're thinking, this is the way one writer put it. We covet most strongly the areas that are important to our sense of self-worth. The area where our self-esteem is the weakest. That's where the temptation comes. Last idea, envy is a hider. It hides. Sometimes it even hides behind noble passion. We explain it away with self-righteousness. Well, I feel this way because. The truth is you feel that way because you're envious. There's a story in one of the Gospels in Luke chapter 13. In this story, Jesus heals a woman who for 18 years has been bent over with infirmity. And Jesus reaches out and touches this woman and releases her from 18 years of bondage. What an unbelievable gift. So what do the religious leaders do? They curse at him. They said, why would you do that on the Sabbath? It's a smokescreen. They don't really care about the Sabbath. In fact, Jesus says you guys are hypocrites. When your animals are thirsty on the Sabbath, don't you untie them and give them something to drink? You care for your own animals. I heal a woman who's been 18 years suffering, and you're worried about the Sabbath? No. What are they worried about? They're envious. Because Jesus can do things that these religious leaders couldn't do. And so what did they do? They cursed him. That even happens in churches and ministries. Sometimes the biggest obstacle to revival in God's church is envy. Oh, that church, yeah, it's really growing. Of course it is. The man who's leading it is so dishonest. That's why that's happening. Really? How do I know if there's some of this stuff in my own soul? Do you ever get upset when people you know advance in front of you, professionally, socially? Does somebody else's success cause you pain? You ever tempted to badmouth someone that you feel inferior of? That's a great one. West Africans tell a funny story. They say if you see a guy up in a tree, instead of asking how he got up there, cut the tree down. That's what we do. If I can show what an idiot he is, then maybe I won't look so bad. You secretly pleased to see a friend or family member set back. Well, this is what God says to his people. Don't covet your neighbor's wife for whatever reason. Read something last week. This man was interviewing a pastor who was retiring, and the pastor was making this statement. He said, you know what? If I would have just been married to Ruth Graham, Billy Graham's wife, oh my goodness, my ministry would have been amazing. And the guy who's writing it says, thank God that Ruth Graham didn't marry this idiot. Her life would have been ruined. He says, don't envy somebody else's wife. Don't envy their life situation, their house or their land or their maidservant. He's not saying your servant's better. He's saying whatever their position is, don't envy that. He says, don't envy their oxen or their donkey. You're going, yes, I have never done that. I have never wanted somebody's donkey or their ox. He's talking about their car, whatever it is they get around in. You ever hear somebody say, oh, well, yes, she drives a whatever. I just saw a commercial yesterday. We do not build cars. We build Cadillacs. Now, if you have one, it's no problem. I'm just saying, all the Cadillacs I've seen, they look pretty much like cars to me. He says, don't envy anything that belongs to him. Why? Because it'll destroy your soul. Third idea, what does envy say about us? Well, what envy really is it's a desire. And desire was put in our heart by God, but when we desire what he didn't intend, it destroys us. So when we envy, one of the things we're saying is that who God made me to be, we're denying its value. He makes each of us unique. He created us to do the works he prepared for us. Gordon MacDonald said, the soul cannot be healthy when you compare yourself to someone else. The soul dies a bit every time it's involved in a lifestyle of comparison. The fact is that our Creator longs for us to be content in who he made us. He didn't make me to be you, and he didn't make you to be me. And you can thank God for that. Isaiah 29, he says this, can a pot say to the potter, he doesn't know what he's doing. So the potter is spinning this pot on a wheel, and he's making a pot to hold oil, and the pot screams out, you have got to be kidding me. I want to be a flower pot. That doesn't happen. But that's what we do with God. I don't want to be. This is a journey that has taken me a lot of years. In our country, if you're a leader and you're a man, then the way that should look is that you should be a leader. For crying out loud, you get her done. That's what leaders do. That's not a bad thing. But that's not how I am. But for years I thought, well, if I'm going to be one of those, that's what I'm supposed to look like. And I kept trying it, and it didn't work. I kept thinking, when I grow up, I'll be one of those. But I grew up, and it didn't happen. Because it wasn't supposed to. That's not who God made me. God made me to be a leader, but that looks like me. And one day when I was praying, he said, are you ever going to just be grateful for what I did? Or are you going to keep trying to change it into something else? I was in Columbus last week at a conference. I was having lunch with a couple pastor friends. And one of them looked at me and said, you are really unique. I said, is that good? He said, no, seriously, you're interesting. I said, you know what, let's just stop this conversation. I don't know what you're trying to say. He said, what I'm trying to say is the way God made you, there's not a lot of people that look like you and act like you. It's beautiful. Love it. He's right. Not because I'm so great, because everybody God made for this beautiful thing. And so often we don't want that. We want it to look like something else. But that's like saying to him, you've got to be kidding me. What were you thinking? The other thing that it says is that we believe that what we have in Jesus is not enough. It's not sufficient. Last night, Angela and I were out for a walk, and we were at the park, and we were looking over this forest and this stream, and it's just so beautiful. And we were saying, there is enough right here to know how good and beautiful God is. And we walk by it every day, and we never even say thank you. But not only that, the New Testament tells us that he loved us so much that he gave his son. And we'll stand and say, that's not enough. How could you not give me whatever it is? And everything that we need, he's given us. Lastly, when we allow envy to get into our soul, we put whatever the something is, and we make it more important than the relationship. And relationship is the greatest gift we have. First to God and then to each other. There's a story in the Old Testament about Miriam and her brother Moses. Miriam was the older sister. Moses was alive because Miriam saved his life. Miriam grew up in a slave's house. Moses grew up in the house of the king, of the Pharaoh. Later, Moses is called by God to come and deliver his people, and God uses this man unbelievably. Miriam marries Aaron. Aaron is Moses' right-hand man. In Numbers chapter 12, it tells a story. Finally, one day, Miriam says, enough already. You've got to be kidding me. My younger brother? Like, who does he think he is? Does he think God only speaks to him? And God comes and he speaks really severely to Miriam and to Aaron. What he said to him is, I don't love Moses more than I love you. I just created him for something that I didn't create you for. And what I'm asking of you is not what I'm asking of him. The point? Envy not only destroyed their relationship, it almost brought catastrophe to God's people. It's ugly. So, in closing, is there a cure for envy? The answer is yes. It's God's grace. You know who's the least surprised that there's envy in your heart? God. He's not overwhelmed by it at all. But the cure is to call it what it is. He says, if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't boast about it or deny the truth. If it's in there, call it what it is and confess it. Let it go. I was looking for an example of this in my own life, and there's probably plenty, but the first one that came to me was my daughter, and it's a lot easier to throw your kids under the bus than yourself. But I asked her if I could tell this story. Last year, Angèle finished her first year at Wheaton. She came home from the summer, and what I'll say is she just kind of had an edge. Like she just seemed frustrated about something, and she kept saying things like, you know, all my friends are doing these internships, they're traveling all over the world, like their parents do this, and she was a little bit miserable. And after a couple of weeks, we all were. So one night we're reading the scriptures together, we're praying, and we're talking, and I said to her, Angèle, at some point, you got to remember who you are. Your name is Angèle Bubna. That's who God created you to be. I wish that your parents had money to send you all over the world. They don't today, and they won't tomorrow, and they won't the next day. Wheaton's a funny place. It's a great school. But the reality is there's a bunch of pastors and missionaries, kids who get to be there because their parents don't make a lot of money, and so they get a lot of grants. And then there's a lot of really wealthy kids, and they get to do all this other stuff. So I said, you're making yourself miserable, and you're making us miserable. If you want to keep doing that, you can. But here's the truth. You are blessed. You get to go to college. There's thousands of people who would love to do that, and they can't. You have a job, so you can pay for it. That's a gift. You have the greatest parents in the world. At least from my perspective. So we prayed together. She came home for this summer in a just totally different place. The same kids are there. They're still all over the world. Nothing changed. But it gets into all of our hearts. So call it what it is and allow God to pour in his grace. Here's the second thing. Cultivate gratitude. Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. Be content. He said, I've learned the secret of contentment no matter where I am. If you have gratitude and you have envy, they won't stay in the same room together. They'll kill each other. So if you want to get envy out of your soul, practice gratitude. You know why you're not grateful? Because you're blind. Because everything you need to be grateful already exists. We just don't see it. It's a discipline. It's a journey. I talk about it a lot. It's a life commitment of mine to be a grateful person. Gratefulness will chase envy out of your soul. The last thing is that the scriptures say, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. So if you want to have the desires of your heart, delight yourself in the Lord. Sometimes we think that, okay, so I delight myself in the Lord and then he gives me. Actually, what happens is you get so delighted with him, you realize that that's what you always wanted, and your heart is full. So how do you get envy out of there? Well, these are some of the things that the scriptures teach us. Call it what it is and ask for his forgiveness. Practice gratitude. Delight yourself in the Lord. Everything that we need is already there in him. Somebody say amen. Thank you, brother. We're going to close this morning with a gratitude feast. We're going to gather for just a few moments around this table and remember that there is nothing that he would withhold for those who come to him. As I pray, I'm going to invite Ernesto and the team to come, and then we will take these last moments and share them around the table. Father, forgive us. Forgive me. So often we're tempted to, man, if I just had that, man, if God would have just done this. And this morning, we just ask you to forgive us. And as we come to the table this morning, and we're reminded that the Creator, the living God, came to us in Jesus and gave himself so that we could know without a shadow of a doubt that we have been loved and forgiven. In Jesus' name, amen.